what force doctrine is saying is very simple. That feminism, if you at least agree with my definition, and it seems broadly feminists do, that it's a movement towards egalitarianism and equity and the removal of patriarchy. If you can't have an oppressed class without an oppressor class, at least not from the Marxist feminist view. In the case, if women are being oppressed, they're not being oppressed by wolves, they're being oppressed by men, right? So if that's the case, then my argument to them is that whatever you believe this oppression is, you will actually have to appeal to men in order to either relinquish whatever this oppression is or concede to whatever it is that they want, because collectively women actually cannot overthrow any patriarchal systems. They rely on the force of men.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with them to an extent, for sure. Definitely, if you're a feminist, you're claiming that there's a patriarchal society, and she agreed to it, so I'm going to use that definition. There's a patriarchal society that needs to be taken down. So if that's your claim, then yes, you're going to have to appeal to that patriarchal society to bring down the patriarchal society, even if it's like getting a woman voted into office. That is still appealing to a patriarchal society, because you have to fight through that to get a woman in there. He's not wrong.
How does this principle work in society? What are you saying in terms of
I'm
how
saying that
women and
because
men coexist?
Yeah, I think that because that is the case, that men deserve to have various privileges that they're not given in society, which they should be given in society.
So what are the privileges that you think that men should have that women should not have?
Well, primarily, I think that if you're going to look at an equalization, what I would do prescriptively would be to roll voting back. And that's for both sexes. I think that rolling voting back for both sexes is a good idea.
You would like to disenfranchise both the men and women's vote?
Mostly. Most of them, yes. I think would be a better idea.
What would this achieve?
Well, it would achieve the same thing our founders basically wanted to achieve, which is that they thought that you would have to have a stake in the country in order to vote.
But if you live in the country, and if you exist in the country, and if you're being legislated by...
She's about to say it, but if you live in this country, you have stake in this country. Even if you're not a citizen, you do have stake. That doesn't mean you should have the right to vote, but if you live in this country, you have a stake in this country. Your life you are at the whim of the American government. Even if you're a citizen, if you're not a citizen, you are at the whim of the American government. I mean, that's pretty true.
By the laws that the country is making, don't you have a stake in that?
No, not always.
You don't?
In fact, many times you don't. Many times, many people actually get more back from the state than they put into the state. So that's at the expense of other people.
Who is that?
So there's lots of people who pay.
Even if that is true. He's not wrong. There are people that don't give as much into the system and take out of the system, like certain disabled people, old people, old people, but they still have stake in the system. They still have a stake, because if those rights were to get taken away, they would be left out in the dust. They would just be out with no resources. They rely on those resources, so of course they have a stake. I hope she says that.
Okay, but they're still at stake because they still live here now?
Yes.
Are their lives not at stake if we're legislating them?
But that
Yes.
wouldn't follow that because they live here, they deserve the right to vote, though.
Yes, no taxation without representation.
Just because you live here, do you deserve the right to vote? No, because I wouldn't say illegal immigrants have the right to vote. So no, just living, and there are illegal immigrants who live here. So no, just living here doesn't mean you have the right to vote.
Prison?
Yeah.
Okay, if they commit a crime, they can go to prison?
Yeah.
Everyone can do that?
Yes.
Okay, and everyone is in this country has to abide by the laws of this country, otherwise they will go to prison, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, so why wouldn't they be allowed to vote on the representatives that define those laws? That is a stake. If you can go to prison for committing a crime that is created by the government, then you do have a stake.
Well, that's still she's being way too general, because criminals criminals are subject to law. Yes, criminals are obviously subject to law. No, immigrants are subject to law, but they don't get a right to vote. Just living here doesn't give you the right to vote. That's not just living here. There's more than just living here. There's plenty of restrictions on who can vote and who cannot vote.
right? Can kings put you in prison?
Yeah,
Can kings also pass just laws?
sometimes, maybe.
Okay, so
maybe not.
if kings pass just laws, why do you need to vote?
Well, why did we fight an entire
answer the
revolution?
question before you ask another one. I just answered all of yours.
Her answer is supposed to be, even if a king is passing just laws, the only person who's deciding whether a law is just or not is the king. What if the king all of a sudden decides, like in the next person? What would it say if his son, that next, the next in line, let's say he doesn't have just laws. That's why we don't have a king, because a king doesn't always have just laws. Even if one does, the next in line might not always have just laws. That's why we don't want a king.
If a king passes just laws, why would you need to vote?
Because a king can also pass unjust laws.
So can legislatures.
Sure, but if you have a stake in that and if you're able to represent.
Yes, you're able to represent yourself. So we vote on our legislators. That's the difference. You don't vote on a king. A king he's the king, and then when he dies, it's his son or his daughter, whoever's next in line.
For your legislator, you can vote a legislator out.
Yeah, but you can
can't
also
vote a king
rebel
out.
against kings. So like that.
You don't. What is he trying to say? You don't want to have to rebel against someone. You don't want to have to go toward rebellion. That's not what we're striving. We don't want rebellion. That's why we don't have kings. We rebelled to not have kings.
And why would we leave the monarchy of England? If kings can make just laws, why would we leave?
Well, in that case, you had a nation apart that had a rebellion against the king.
Yes,
That's what was
sure.
going on. But kings have been rebelled against.
I really don't get why she's struggling with this point. Just, you say we don't want a king because, yes, even if one king is making just laws, he can all of a sudden decide, all right, I'm just going to do whatever I want because he's a king, or his next in line can always all of a sudden decide, I just want to do what I want and screw over my people. That's the reason we don't want a king. That's a pretty clear-cut thing. King is not always going to make just decisions. That's why we don't want one person in office for too long.
Historically, under certain circumstances, many times.
So you'd like to go back to feudalism? Like
No,
you
it's not
don't believe in
feudalism.
democracy? Well, yeah, that is
No,
the
it would be
feudalism is under a monarchy.
It would be called limited democracy, which is exactly what we had here. Do you think we had feudalism because most people couldn't vote here?
We had limited democracy, and then there were like many uprisings against that limited democracy because everyone deserves
there
the
wasn't
right.
uprisings really against that. The only uprising that I'm aware of in American history against America was the Civil War.
The Civil War.
I mean, he's talking about a rebellion, but there's been like women's suffrage. That's an uprising against, not an uprising, but it was protesting for women's right to vote, right?
People need to be able to vote because they have a stake in the legislation in this country. If you can be imprisoned in this country, if you can be robbed of your bodily autonomy by the legislators of this country, then you should be able to have a stake in what the laws that those legislators are making.
Well,
no?
let's see.
Okay, I hate what this girl Naima is saying. It's, you want people to vote. We don't even want all people to vote. We don't let criminals vote. We don't let people under 18 vote. We want the most people we can to vote who will represent the American body. That's what we want. We want as many people as we can who are eligible under our laws that we've made to be able to vote. That's what we want. Not just because you live in this country and you have stake in it. There's plenty of people who live in this country who don't actually have the right to vote. Felons don't get the right to vote. Illegal immigrants don't get the right to vote. So that doesn't make sense.
So isn't it the case, actually, that what you're advocating for is political tribalism? Because you don't have individual power as a voter, you actually have to tribalize with other voters in order to have any sort of collective.
I don't like the word tribalize, but that's a way you can put it. You have to group up with people to get your point across. You have to get people. That's the point of advocating for policies and things like that. You have to push people in your direction. Yes. So yeah, he's right.
Do you agree with me that you do, if you need to have collectives to have actual political power, are you not promoting political tribalism?
If you need to have but that's how voting works. It's about a majority.
So then you are.
Why can't she just agree? Yes, you can. Just bite the bullet. Who cares? Yes, you need some form of tribalism. Sure. If that's the word that you want to use, sure. Yes, we do need tribalism. Just agree. Yes, take it on the chin.
Your worldview promotes political tribalism. So what happens is this: NGOs can go to our government and they can bribe them for voting blocks, and that's exactly what they do. Non-government organizations do this, and lobbyists do this. And what they do is they raid the treasury from people like you and me so that they can bribe certain portions of the electorate in order to incentivize them to collectivize.
See, like, a perfect disagreement would be, like, yes, that can happen in our system, and it does happen sometimes, true, but in the system that you're advocating for, it can happen. It won't be as large of a scale. You can't bribe as many people, but bribes still happen, and they've always happened throughout history. That's never something that you're going to be able to eliminate. Maybe he'll make the argument that would happen significantly less, but I would make the argument that you want as many people as represented as possible in America. Those who we deem qualify. Those who are above a certain age probably should be higher than 18, but whatever. Those who are not felons, and those who are citizens. That's what we deem. Those are who we deem worthy of being able to represent themselves.
So why would taking away votes from the average American and singular citizen prevent NGOs and lobbyists from having an ability to impact and predict and create laws?
Yeah, so if you move to stakeholder democracy, this idea that you had to have some sort of public service or something like this, it actually collectivizes down the voting pool, which adds responsibility to the voters who can then be held accountable, which right now voters can't be. That's why.
I get what he's trying to say. You can be held more accountable, but voters are still held accountable for their actions. It's just much less indirect. But he's right that if we had less people who were voting, those people would have a much higher stake in the vote. We would be able to look towards those people as the people who made the mistakes. Like, it would be much clearer who made the mistakes if we only had like a couple thousand people. Not a couple thousand, that's too much, but like if we only had like 1 million or 100,000 people who were voting, it would be much easier to point towards, okay, where's the problem? Where is our problem coming from? Who's making the wrong decisions? Things like that.
Important. So
Voters
you're saying,
can be held accountable.
so you're saying how?
Well, legislators will create laws that hold those voters accountable.
How?
We're the ones who have to follow them. Do you
True.
not?
How are they? Well, that's not you being held accountable.
It is being held accountable.
No. So right now, under tribalism,
Semantics.
you can get laws passed which affect me but benefit you. I can't go like hold you somehow accountable for that.
But that's how a majority voting works. That's how democracy
I know,
works.
which is why I want limited democracy where we can actually hold people
because
accountable.
you just want to be in charge.
How would I be in charge if it's stakeholder democracy?
Like, yes, if you had less people voting, there would be more incentives for those people to make educated decisions. We don't want that. We want as much representation as we can. I don't think we need that many qualifications for you to represent yourself in this country. I think that's too many qualifications.
There's the other ways of doing that.
Another good way would be public service.
So whoever
Perhaps
does
up
a
to
public service.
Perhaps up to 3 to 5 years unpaid, or military service would be good.
So during this public service in which people are working 3 to 5 years unpaid, how are they paying for food and groceries and housing?
Yeah, so the state would take care of that just like they do in the military.
The state would take care of that like they do in the military. And how do you plan on getting that passed?
What does that have to do with anything?
Well, because
Let's say I
not
could
trying
never
to
get it
create-
passed. We're arguing the ideology of this system. What does that?
Well,
Okay, I won't lie. I would not do 3 years of civil service to get the right to vote. I'm not gonna lie. That's a bit much. That is a bit much. Unpaid, that is a bit much. I wouldn't do that. But I would, if he was willing to compromise somewhere, if you had to make it like you had to pass, like in certain states you have to pass certain tests to get high school diploma or GED. So if you made it so across the board that you needed to pass a certain level of civics or like a state civics exam, then you're able to get a high school level, a high school diploma or GED. I would agree with that. I would take that, because then most people, by the time they get to the age where they can vote, will have some background in civics, at least a minor background in civics, compared to people today who have no background in civics at all.
So you're basically saying anyone who does community service should get the right to vote?
No, some sort of civil occupational service under the state. That could be like civil firefighting work, maybe. It could be civil paramedic work. It could be there's all sorts of different things you can look at for stakeholder democracy. When we've seen it applied around the world, it's been somewhat successful.
And do the laws apply to everyone in the society or just the people who choose to participate in this
still apply to everyone,
democracy? Okay. So how can you create and apply a law to people who are not represented? I just don't understand morally how to.
There are already people in this country who have the laws applied to them who aren't represented. Illegal immigrants are not represented. Felons are not represented. This is already happening. You can say that you disagree with it, but this already happens.
How do you justify?
There's nothing immoral about it.
There's nothing immoral about. I mean, but that's
like
kind of
I
like
would say it's
consent.
more immoral. Why is it moral for an 18-year-old to nullify the vote of a 41-year-old if the 18-year-old doesn't even know what they're voting for? How's that moral?
Fair.
Well, because the 18-year-old is still subject to the laws of the state.
Yeah, but they don't
If an
even know
18-year-old
what they're voting for.
Can an 18-year-old go to jail for 20 years?
A 16-year-old can. Should they be able to vote?
16-year-olds can't go to jail.
Yes, they can. 16-year-olds can go to jail for life. Should they be able to vote?
I mean, no, but why?
Well, why
would they be
not?
going
Why
to
not?
jail
The
for-
laws apply to them, though.
Why would a 16-year-old be going?
Hang
to
on,
jail
I don't
for
understand.
that,
Because he murdered someone.
though? Okay, that's fair. I mean, if you
Yeah.
murder someone, that's a whole.
So I don't understand. Why can't he vote? The
Well,
laws
because we
apply to
all
him. Why can't he
understand
vote?
that. Yeah, but we all understand that. a
No,
16-year-old
we all understand it's.
Oh, we all explain it. No, if we all understand it, then explain it real quick. Obviously, he doesn't understand it, or he's presenting like he doesn't understand it. So explain it to him, because it's clear I don't understand it. Explain it to me, please. Explain why. Why is it that it's immoral for younger people or for people who have the laws applied to them not to be able to vote, but there already are people who the laws apply to that are not able to vote. There are people who can't vote, who have no representation in this country, who the laws apply to. So she has to have a justification for that.
It still wouldn't matter. Laws apply to them. They can still be sent to prison. They fit both of your criteria. Therefore, if you say they shouldn't be able to vote, your worldview's in contradiction.
Well, then I think that's wrong. I don't believe that children should be tried as adults until they have become adults.
So no
I
laws
disagree with
apply to
that.
children.
No.
Well, then why shouldn't?
That is her argument, though. That is what she's saying. If her original argument was, if you live in this country and the laws apply to you, if you can go to jail, then you should be represented. But that's not true. That is just not the case. And she doesn't believe that because children, like she said, the laws apply to children. Most laws apply to children, to my knowledge, but they are not represented. They don't get to vote.
Yeah, but why shouldn't they be able to vote if laws apply to them? That's your example.
Laws apply to children, but they are not in practice punished in the same way that they apply to adults. It's applied
Can they be
differently.
punished?
Of course they can
Then
be
why
punished.
can't they vote?
But you have to have some way to maintain societal control. Children aren't just allowed to do whatever the fuck they want because they're
Right.
kids.
You need to be able to have some sort of societal control. So
Yes.
this would mean necessarily disenfranchising some people, wouldn't it?
It would mean necessarily disenfranchising children. Yes, they're not
no,
adults.
it would also mean
She needs to completely pivot from what her talking points are. Yes, Andrew, we're gonna disenfranchise some people, but we do not want to disenfranchise that many people. The amount of people you want to disenfranchise is too many. That is way too many people. Should there be more people who are disenfranchised? Should we raise the age on voting a little bit? Maybe. Should we make it so there's more criminals for different types of crimes who aren't able to vote? Maybe. I could agree with some of those things, but the amount of people that you want to exclude from being represented is too much. I think that's way too much.
Why is it a healthy society to have men and women who are married voting against each other? That's a terrible idea.
Because they're both like. But if a man commits a murder, does his wife go to jail for that crime?
No.
No, because they're not the same fucking person.
No, do you understand that like people's preferences change over time? And there could be various reasons in which if you have a tribal type of mentality, like take abortion, for instance.
Okay, I'm going to start debating for her. Yes, there are people whose ideas are going to change over time, but that's why we want people to be able to represent themselves. We don't want it to just be one household, because let's say one person does change their opinion over time, then they're not able to actually be represented. Those ideas are not going to be represented in our country. We want those ideas to be represented.
This divisive tribalism is what enables NGOs to begin with. They make a ton of money off of it, especially off of race hustling and DEI.
So then again, why not just ban NGOs and lobbyists?
Yeah,
and
you can't
allow everyone to still have a vote in a representative
I'm giving
democracy.
you the descriptor.
I think it's hilarious that you keep calling democracy tribalism.
It leads to tribalism, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean,
Full democracy leads to tribalism.
So
There's
does
no way around
sports.
it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so does sports, sure.
so should we ban sports?
Then you're agreeing. Then just agree. How are you defending it now, but you're not agreeing with it? Just say, yes, it leads to tribalism. So what? Who cares? That to an extent, you kind of want tribalism. You want people around you to have similar ideas to you, so you guys can push for things that benefit you as a whole.
Why would you ban sports? That's a total non sequitur. It makes no sense.
Why would you ban a huge percentage of the population from voting?
Because I would want to avoid political tribalism so that elitists can't exploit low information voters, which they do right now, in order to enslave the planet.
So you're basically saying that people are too stupid.
I mean, I wouldn't say to enslave the planet. I wouldn't get too dramatic about it. But yes, there's definitely people who get incentivized by certain people who don't have the knowledge that they need to counter those claims. We would probably disagree about who's getting swayed in the wrong directions, but yes, that is generally true.
Than an IQ test. I would not disenfranchise a person from being able to vote because they have like an average IQ.
Yeah.
What I would do is disenfranchise a person to vote if they were low information. One way I could find out if they were really politically motivated is if they sacrificed years of their lives to the state in order to get that right to vote.
So you want to punish people for being stupid?
No, I just don't want them to nullify well-informed votes from people who are smart and on the issues and understand the issues.
But taking away someone's vote would be punishing them in a sense.
It's not punishing them.
Yeah, it kind of
It's
is.
actually stopping them from punishing themselves and the rest of society because they're easily exploited by.
See, I would ask if he thinks only the smartest of the smart should be allowed to vote. Does he think only the smartest people and the people who have the absolute most knowledge about our government and structure, should those people be allowed to vote? I would argue that there should be a higher qualification to be able to vote. Like you should probably have to take some form of civics exam. I don't think you should impose that on people who've already passed high school. But I think like if one day you said, all right, starting now, if you want a high school diploma across the country, you need to have some level of civics. There needs to be some level of state civics exam, and it needs to be given to all students who want a high school diploma or GED. Everyone needs that, because then most people, not everyone, most people would have some background in civics.
And you think that education's going to solve the problem of the low information voter?
Well, if the issue is that people are stupid, help them be smarter.
There's a lot of that is.
So the issue is just because you're throwing a lot of money at something doesn't mean it's necessarily good. Most likely what's happening is that we have to take another look at how we do our schooling, because that he's right, the literacy rate is very low. So we most likely have to reevaluate how we do our schooling.
This whole stupid progressive idea of like, you can educate people into whatever it is. It's like, no, you really can't. Like, there's a lot of people who are just going to be fucking janitors, okay? There's a lot of, okay?
All right.
There's a lot of people who are just going to be fucking janitors and who are just going to be fucking toilet bowl cleaners and who are just going to be fucking bartenders and are really not meant to build fucking rocket ships, okay?
I know, but they're still subject to laws.
And yes, they are still subject to laws, but that doesn't matter. But we want those people, even if they are janitors, even if they don't have as high as an IQ as everyone else, we want those people to be represented because we coexist with those people. We don't want only the people who are the smartest or the brightest, who have reached all these super high burdens of qualifications to be making decisions, because that doesn't represent the majority of America.
Now, if you were able to, if these people were able to cast votes and nullify all of the votes of you high information voters, right? Wouldn't it actually be better for them and for you to disenfranchise their voting so that you guys could actually vote on political and policy issues that made sense?
Well, I don't think that stupid people are nullifying all of the votes of smart people.
It's the word he's using, nullifying. Like, if you're thinking about it like that, smart people are voting one way and then dumb people are voting a different way. Yes, you can say that their votes are being nullified because there's more stupid people than smart people. But I wouldn't phrase it like that. I don't think all stupid people are voting one way and all smart people are voting another way. There are probably certain people who are more informed who make better decisions, but even informed people can have disagreements.
You should have
Why do you want dumb people to disenfranchise your well-informed vote? That makes no sense. Not only that, you say that you're actually emboldening them with their free will, right? It's like, that's so silly, because ultimately these people who are...
We want that, Andrew, because if there are majority dumb people in our society, that means we coexist with a majority of dumb people. Those people, whether we like it or not, are part of our lives and they affect our lives. They affect smart people's lives for sure. So you want those people to be represented. You don't want a group of dumb people who are angry, because then you get revolution.
You have some type of civil service, right? Okay. Which a person would participate in for at least 5 years.
5 years?
Yes, unpaid.
5?
Yes, unpaid.
That's ridiculous.
Why? Do you think that the person who participated in it for 5 years unpaid would really want to be politically informed by the end?
Yes. So in that situation, you're gonna have a lot of your voters are gonna be highly informed because they went through that, but that's too high of a burden and not enough people are going to actually want to go through that process. I am damn well not. I don't think I know anyone who would to vote. That is way too high of a burden, especially in this day and age where people don't even really care about politics. They pretend to care, but they don't actually care. They don't actually do anything about it. So that's way too high of a burden. Like, should we increase the burden a bit? Yes, there should be an increased burden. To get a high school diploma, you should have to take a civics exam, like I've said multiple times during this. There should be a higher burden. Age increase is another good one, but that's an astronomically high burden. We don't want that high of a burden because not enough people get represented. Only a very specific type of person would be voting.
Service guarantees citizenship.
So can I ask, who's paying for 5 years of millions of people participating in a civil?
Well, chances would be pretty good it wouldn't be millions, or at least not hundreds of millions of people participating in such a system.
So
It'd be
you
a
would
very
like to
low
limit the
demographic.
voting block in this country to less than, there's 430.
Yes, that's his entire point. Where is she? Is she even in the whatever podcast room right now? Is she sitting at the whatever podcast table? Yes, that is his entire point. He wants less people to be voting. He only wants highly informed people to be voting. Your disagreement has to, you don't even know. She doesn't. I actually don't think she knows what his point is. Your disagreement has to be that I want as many people as possible who we deem qualified to be able to vote. I don't think the burden should be as high as you're saying, but I agree that the burden could be higher.
What I'm saying to you is that, like, it's very silly for me to look at an argument like you're making and say, oh my God, 100,000 people are going to be in charge, or 200,000 people are going to be in charge. Like, ultimately, one person's in charge.
So you're saying
ultimately one person's in charge.
But there's still checks and balances. That one person isn't a king.
There still would be checks and balances with limited voting.
Power in the
There's still checks and
that one person is in charge, but we get to change that based on our representation, based on our vote. We get to change that. But if we're not as represented, then it's not going to be the case that most Americans, or our leader, is not going to be picked by a majority of what Americans feel. It's going to be picked by a very few select group of people. That's not good. We want as much people as we can to be represented, who we deem qualified.
There's another way you could do this too. If you didn't want to do like the civil service way, you could do one vote per household. That would limit the voting significantly. Hang on.
Okay.
And it would be not expensive at all.
Okay.
But there's even another way that you can do it on top of that.
Alrighty.
Right? But let's just start with like one household voting.
Okay.
Same thing.
Let's do it.
You can.
One household voting is not good because then you're requiring that someone has to be a homeowner. unless you would expand it to renters. But from how he sounds, I don't get to have a talk with Andrew Wilson, but from how he sounds, it sounds like he's advocating for very specific people to have a say, like landowners to have a say. I don't think renters qualify under a landowner. They don't own the land that they're on. They don't even really own the apartment that they're living in. They're renting it. It's borrowed.
Another thing you could do is just eliminate anybody being able to vote until they reach the same age that they could become president of the United States.
Is that not 35?
Mm-hmm.
So you think that everyone under 35 should lose the right to vote?
Why shouldn't everyone under 35
that
be
was
able?
the most boomer shit I've ever
Why
heard.
shouldn't every?
Should you only get the right to vote 35 and up? With that, I still think that's too high of a burden for me. I still think that's a bit too high. Maybe I think it has to be, you have to keep it in the 20s at least. It has to be in the 20s. I would still be opposed to like high 20s, like 29, but I would be much more willing to meet somewhere in the middle if you started somewhere in the 20s. Like if you start at 29, I maybe can meet you at 27, but you're starting at 35, I'm not going to be able to meet you at 30. 30 is way too much. I can even maybe meet you at 29 for the voting age. I can understand that, but that's pretty old.
Everybody under 35 be able to be the president of the United States?
Well, because they don't have but they're still...
Why? Answer the question.
Because they do not yet have the experience in politics to run an entire country.
So
but just because you can't...
Yes, that is correct. We want a president to have the wisdom to run a country, but that shouldn't be the same exact burden just to vote on them. So yeah, I know I would definitely disagree with the 35 number. You don't need the same exact burden as our president needs to run the country just to vote on the president. No, that's not the burden that you need. That's way too high. Nope.
If the founders didn't think you should be president of the United States till you were 35, I don't think they wanted you to vote either. And you know what? That's why it was never law. Voting
Andrew,
rights are affirmed.
This is some old shit.
That's not an argument. That's not an argument.
Well, I mean, the reason why
give me the argument
is because you're young, you're old. Like you are not applicable to this law.
What did that?
Yeah, she's lost it. She lost the plot. She's out of here. She's not even arguing with him anymore. She can't even engage with the points. He's making good points. This could be a really good conversation. She's not engaging with him. I'm very, very upset by the leftist representation right now. Honestly, I really never thought that Andrew was going to push me a bit further right, but I really don't think Naima was prepared to talk about voting rights. Assuming that, she did do pretty well, thinking on her feet and giving certain talking points back, but I don't think she was willing enough to concede on certain points, even though it was pretty clear that she hasn't thought through this topic too much. Andrew, I thought, did really well, but I disagree with a lot of the foundation of his argument. He did make me think a little deeper about these topics, pushing me a little bit further towards his position, but I definitely don't agree that we should have as many restrictions on voters' rights as he was talking about. I think there could be an increase in restrictions. That's fine. I could understand some arguments for why we would need to raise the voting age, maybe increase the qualifications, like taking some sort of civics exam. But having someone spend 5 years doing civil service, it's way too much. Having someone be 35 till they can vote, that's a bit too much. I don't think you're going to represent enough people in America when you have a system like that. Other than that, thanks for making it to the end of the video. If you disagree with anything I said, be sure to let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, especially if you want to see me react to the rest of this debate. I'm going to start doing full live reactions if I ever hit 50 subscribers, so I can disagree with you guys on live and maybe bring some of you on to debate me. Other than that, thanks again for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.